Welcome to the Savvy Dentist podcast with Dr. Jesse Green, the show where great dentistry meets great business. Listen in each week as we bring you an inspiring person who will share their story, ideas and business techniques to help you create a practice and a life you love. And now introducing your host, Dr. Jesse Green.
Hello everyone, it's Jesse Green here. Welcome back to SavvyDentist.com and to the Savvy Dentist podcast. It's wonderful to have your company for another episode of the show. And in this week's show, I want to talk all about scaling. Now, scaling is something that at Savvy Dentist we're really well known for. We help practice owners create a business and a life that they love, and we do that with our scaling process. And the consequence of scaling is you still maintain really high levels of income. You still get to take home great amounts of money if you want to, but you also free up your time. And when you free up your time and you're still making money, then you create choice in your life. And it's that choice that gives people flexibility to do the things that they love because they can. And in today's conversation, I want to be talking to a couple of really wonderful practice owners, Dr. Adam Bradshaw and his lovely wife, Sam Bradshaw, who have been on a journey of scaling their practice, which is called Jacaranda Family Dental up in Gympie in Queensland. And in this episode, Sam and Adam are really generous. They share their story, they share their experiences, they share their lessons. And it's really a bit of a blueprint for how they scaled their practice. They went originally from, one chair as they started out to 2 chairs, to 4 chairs, then to 6 chairs, and now to 12 chairs. And that journey is a replicable journey. And they're going to share with you some of the things that they learned, some of the things that they've done, some of the things that have worked really well for them, so that as you go on your scaling journey, you too can create a practice and a life that you love. So without any further ado, here's Sam and Adam Bradshaw. I hope you enjoy this podcast as much as I enjoyed talking to these wonderful, wonderful people. Sam and Adam Bradshaw, welcome to the Savvy Dentist podcast, coming to us all the way from Gympie. How are you?
We're fantastic, Jesse. Thank you so much for having us on the show. We're really pleased to be here.
You guys are like the quintessential case study for how to scale up and how to scale up well. And I want to obviously get into the nuts and bolts of that, but I guess not every practice, or in fact most practices never start as a scaled operation. Some people might buy one already done, but you guys started a practice from scratch. You've been through all that growing, all those growing pains and learned all those lessons. I wanted just to understand, what was the practice like in the early days? What's the origin story there?
So for the listeners, I'm a dentist. Sam is an oral health therapist. In the early days, I guess what we wanted to achieve with Jacaranda Family Dental was really having the freedom to practice the way we wanted. We felt that some of the other practices we worked at, we were, I guess, sort of hamstrung by either certain systems or lack of systems. And to be able to do it the way we wanted was, I guess, at the cornerstone of why we did it. What it was like, I think any listeners out there who've set up a practice or any business from scratch, the days are long, the nights are short. You very much run on adrenaline and the excitement of this, I guess, this new venture. For us, we were the first practice in our area that was doing Saturday appointments. We were the first one doing any reasonable after-hours appointments. The status quo for a long time was very much standard business hours and you turn up. So, I guess, the days were long, but, we loved it and we'd do it again.
When you were going through this stage in those early days, what sort of things did you encounter? Was it all, I imagine it wasn't all plain sailing. In fact, I'd be surprised and I know a lot of people would probably be going, it's not fair if everything was roses and all the rest of it. So what were the things that you encountered? What were some of those early challenges and how did you work your way through them?
We didn't actually employ any staff. It was just the two of us. We literally did everything within the practice, from answering the phones, obviously making those appointments. We worked under rubber dam. So I remember there were days where Adam would, start a restoration in the surgery. I'd be there assisting. The phone would ring. I'd duck out. A patient would walk in and then I would return and, Adam had finished his treatment. It was within probably the first fortnight, to be quite honest, that I spoke to Adam about employing our first staff member and feeling the need We loved it. We were happy to put in the big hours, but we just needed that assistance quite early on.
I think your first staff member, especially first clinician more so, it's like dropping your child off at daycare for the first time. You know, you've created this little baby and you're asking someone else to come in and look after it and nurture it and grow it with you. So, yeah, of course, there's a lot of pressure on picking the right person. I was probably, reluctant to put on the first person. I thought we'd keep doing a bit longer, but yeah, Sam made a convincing argument that we needed that person.
Yeah, well, it's turned out that you probably needed a lot of people over the years as things have progressed. But I want to come back to that first hire and particularly that first clinical set of hands that you hired as well. You said that it was like dropping your baby off at daycare, and I'm wondering, how you managed to let go, because one of the common traps that we see regularly, and I'm sure others have experienced it as well, is sometimes letting go is really hard. We tend to want to supervise and monitor and dare I say even micromanage sometimes. And I'm curious to understand what allowed you to build your clinical team to the point where they're competent, they're autonomous, they're doing good stuff.
You've got to better trust your team. You've got to better trust them to take on, the values of the practice, to be able to uphold those values. For us, we want to do practice a certain way. So it was ensuring that the team members we'd introduce would follow that same philosophy. That does make it, I guess, tough when you're picking through a pool of candidates, especially after these long days, and you may have a lot of applicants, and we certainly did for various positions early on. But yeah, I think it's distilling down those values, what's important. And then if I look back at the most successful hires over the years, the people who've had the longest, who've caused us the least amount of heartache or stress, the people we look at and very similar values to our own. So that's probably what makes it, if I had a lesson, that's what I'd say from that stage.
Absolutely. I would say, hiring on attitude and culture fit rather than that dental specific experience has put us in good stead, both support staff and clinicians. We've had some fantastic people come with a wealth of experience and they've been phenomenal, but I feel like it's because they've been that beautiful culture fit for us as well.
You guys have got a great team culture, and I think, I see that shining through in all the things that you do, whether it's your social media, whether it's your recruitment. Culture is always at the very forefront of what you do. I wanted to just ask you about how you consciously created that culture, because culture is a word that kind of gets thrown around a lot. People kind of go, yeah, you got to have a great culture, blah, 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 blah. But it doesn't happen by accident. It kind of happens by design. And you guys have nailed it perhaps better than just about anyone I can think of. In fact, I was in a conversation with someone today, and your name specifically came up as, wow, these guys just do it so well. So I'm just curious to ask if you've got any particular insights or experiences about how you went about building your culture and what worked well as you did that.
I think it comes down to you've got to start with, those key values that are important to you. Essentially, that's going to underpin how you look after your patients or your customers or your clients in whatever business you're in. It's going to be how you look after your staff. It's how your staff expected to look after people. So I tended to think if I look at the values that we sort of hold up above the rest, a lot of them, to an extent, are innate somewhat. It doesn't mean that they're pulled out muscle memory all the time. Like some of them do require a bit of, I need to consciously remember to choose this in this moment. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think they're ones that tend to be innate because they're the ones you tend to kind of drop back to, if you are tired or stressed or, things are really busy or whatnot. So it's easy to sort of build around those. I think that's really where it starts nowadays. And I think in terms of building that culture, I think being really clear on those values, but also communicating that really clearly to your team that these are important. When these values are done right and they're upheld, this is what that looks like. Here are some behaviours of what these values look like, but also, I guess, flipping that coin over and acknowledging that, hey, look, if we slip on this value, if we let the standard slide, this is like the anti-behavior or the opposite of the value that we're trying to hold, and acknowledging those, and I guess giving your team the power to be able to call each other out on it. I mean, that ultimately would be the gold standard, and I think in any big team you'll have those members who probably better at flying the culture flag than others, and I guess you're hoping they're serving as your lieutenants when you're not there, and the boss isn't watching over people's shoulder. So that's, I think, probably the starting point for us, at least, in developing that culture in the team.
I want to just get a bit of a sense of what the team looked like in those early days. Who was that first hire? I'm assuming it was either a DA or a receptionist. What was that early stage growth like? What did the team look like? Any HR lessons from that particular point in time? And I imagine it's still pretty key person dependent. So there's the period of rapid growth there, and obviously a bit to go through. So Sam, I know that's probably 3 questions rounded into one, but any thoughts around that?
Absolutely. We employed an experienced dental assistant initially. Because we were so snowed under with everything, we felt like it was better to employ someone experienced. She was a lovely girl and came to us with a certificate 3. She was lacking in some vital skills though, and had asked for quite a substantial pay rise quite early on. So that was probably the first HR lesson from our point of view. We did then turn a cold shoulder to the idea of employing someone with experience, and thought that if we made the decision to hire on attitude and spend the time training our staff, we would maybe be put in better stead. We had an amazing receptionist with 12 years experience join us as well, and to this day I would hire her 10 times over.
Wow.
She was an absolute blessing to us in those early days. Very much almost a guiding light, but very humble in her approach and very measured as well. Very respectful in that it was our practice, but very open to share her thoughts and ideas as well. So, we talk about luck in this world, and, I did feel lucky to have her in that moment. In saying that, she was attracted to us and our practice for a reason as well. So that was really lovely.
Yeah, I guess looking back at some of those lessons, don't assume that someone's qualification means that they're competent. I think you always need to vet, qualifications better. Then it's about setting expectations. I think that's always important for anyone, and that could even come back to new patients joining your practice and what they might expect from the patient experience. But the girl who wanted the massive pay rise, I think if we talk about key people, practice she came from, she was the key person, and she was paid well and truly significantly above the award for that. I think the next lesson was very much, don't be prejudiced. For me, I sort of felt a bit burnt by the fact we employed someone with experience with a certificate 3, and that may have sort of prevented us from hiring some other good candidates who came from other practices. If I could go back in time and change one thing, that would probably be the lesson I'd give us, is to just take every applicant, take every opportunity at face value every time.
And some really good advice there. And obviously it was a period of rapid growth. That early days, you guys came out of the blocks hard and fast, and patients were coming in, phones were ringing, all that was happening. Tell me how that felt. I mean, that must have been exciting, and it would have been wonderful and all the rest of it, but it's also taxing at times, and you're juggling lots of balls, spinning lots of plates. So there would have been, I imagine, a mixed emotions kind of scenario. Just walk me through what that was like.
It's so funny, Jesse, because I feel like we were reliable and competent, and we had our patients' needs as our number one focus. So to be busy, and we were just kind of rolling with what we had to do each day. I do remember feeling like we wanted to be part of the community from those early days, and we would be at the practice 6 days a week. We would then have a market stall on a Sunday, and patients just loved that we were approachable and down to earth. In saying that though, I remember always looking at the appointment book on the Saturday for the following week and thinking, do we need to go tomorrow? Do we need to be there? So we did that consistently for the first few months of the practice, and then our books had built to a point that we were comfortable to not go ahead with that.
It was actually really lovely. I remember essentially when we stayed, we had a market stall. It was literally purely promotion. I mean, if any listeners want a hot tip, buy a giant Elmo costume and hand out colouring ins to kids. It's a winner. But there was another gentleman who was doing a similar thing for a motor insurance company. And I remember he came over, mid-morning and said to us, look, I see what you guys are doing down here. I've been in marketing for a long time. I won't see you down at these markets for very long because you simply won't need to. So I guess that was like a massive pat on the back early on,
nice.
And to say, look, you guys are doing the right thing. You've got this, and I mean, obviously, then seeing that the appointment diary was filling up, that money was coming in. Obviously, if you don't have that, you're in dire straits. But I think from there we just saw that things were moving forward, and that sort of then spurs you on to keep doing it.
Yeah, fantastic. And I don't know, I saw an Elmo suit on eBay. I'm just wondering, was that yours, Adam? Or you still got it for just social events?
Kids' birthdays, parties, probably.
Okay.
We've got 2 young girls, so I might have to pull it out for theirs, but that might be about it.
All right, okay, retiring Elmo. All right. So I wanted to ask you about inflection points, and how many chairs initially did you have put in?
We just had the 2. We had the surgery plumbed and wired to have 4 surgeries operating.
Yep.
We just had the 2 initially, and we'd piggyback appointments. So, Adam would have a patient, then I would have a patient, which, looking back, I wouldn't recommend doing that for anyone. You want to build your books, from the start to be able to have staff to support you. But it wasn't that we didn't have the confidence in our own ability to build the practice. It was the unknown, very much so, in those early days, and not knowing how the community would receive us. I remember, patients, first of all calling to make an appointment, but then rebooking. And that genuinely just warmed my heart considerably, to know that they'd had a really positive experience with us and they were happy to come back to see us. And it's something I try to instill with our team still, 9 years on, that to never take anything for granted. These patients are putting their trust in us to deliver the very best in dental care, and to not take things for granted.
Well, obviously you had considerable success. What I'm really hearing, and this is coming through so clearly, is the values are coming through. For the listeners on this podcast, they'll hear the values coming through in everything you say, the community, the care of the patients, and I see that in all that you do. And it's no surprise to me then that those first 4 chairs filled up pretty quickly, and you would have hit a capacity ceiling at that point. So tell us a little bit about that. What was that like? How busy were you? How did the team cope? How did you cope? What was that level like?
I mean, by that stage, we clearly, we had some runs on the board, a bit of, bit behind us. We had some momentum, and I guess, we were leasing a site in a shopping centre essentially, and it was about, what does that next step look like for us? There was vacant space next door. It was a considerable amount, though, more than we would want to take on. It was more than our existing lease in terms of floor area. So we were on the lookout then for, I guess, our own commercial premises, to be able to grow into, own the asset, and give us that security long term that, we can be there. We don't have to worry about leases being renewed and rents being hiked and whatnot. So we did spend a considerable amount of time trying to find that perfect site. And I don't expect a lot of listeners to know the geography of Gympie well, but it's quite hilly. We have the Mary River splits the town through the middle, and we get some pretty substantial flooding. So whilst you might see pockets of vacant land, you think that'd be a nice spot. You look at the flood line and the whole thing is considerably underwater, sometimes 2 or 3 times a year if it's a bad flooding year. So in the end, that large tenancy next door did get chopped up by the landlord. Someone took, 80, 90% of it, and they left this small 30 square metre pocket, which just fitted perfectly for a very small expansion for an additional 2 chairs. So we jumped at that opportunity. It represented very little risk to us at the time. We had some cash behind us with cash flow. We could do that, and we had the patient flow to justify it. And essentially, those 2 rooms became the hygienist rooms, which freed up more chair space for further dentists to come on board. So that was probably the first major, I guess, change in what we did, other than adding the chairs to the existing rooms. It's probably no surprises. We filled those chairs very quickly and were again up against the same constraint though. So
yeah. So I want to ask you a little bit about the team, because when you're at that 4-chair stage, just before you kind of changed gears and got the extra 2 chairs, you would have been managing long hours, team probably feeling a bit tired and stressed and all the rest of it. And of course, you guys having to learn and develop new skills as leaders in the business. Tell me a little bit about, how the team performed, what you did to build and grow that team. And obviously, as the team's getting bigger, it's harder to keep that consistency across the board. I know you guys are amazing at training and across all the different roles in the practice. I want to ask you a little bit about what you've learned in that process and why that's become such an important part of what you do.
When you're getting a larger team, you're not going to keep everyone. And even though you learn some lessons in HR along the way and vetting new candidates, you're always going to have a hire that doesn't work out, at which point you invested some time, some money into their training, and you need to be able to call that quickly. And you need to be able to train that replacement person quite quickly. So it certainly meant, identifying those more senior staff within the team and leaning on them as a resource, essentially, as a training resource. And for a long time, I'll be honest, we had one of those staff members who did that. And I like training people. It's no surprise most dentists are OCD. I think it's hardwired in, but I like training because I could make sure they've done things to my standard, and I enjoyed that. But that in itself gets taxing if it's always the same person. So I think it's about building some redundancy in your system. You don't have the one person doing all the training in the same room all the time. The other thing I found with the bigger team as well is, I said earlier, we do some extended hours, working until twice a week. We did do some Saturdays, and I think it's always this balance to try and achieve, like this work-life balance, okay? We try to offer a 4-day roster to our team members, where essentially, because there's a couple of bigger days thrown in, they're doing pretty well full-time hours over 4 days. It sounds amazing on paper, and they seem to love it at first, but you do need to be mindful about people pacing themselves, and it's interesting to find that sometimes what sounds like a good idea to people at first, they want to renegotiate and finish early. So I guess it's always making sure that what you're doing is sustainable, but also what positions you're offering fills an operational role, and you need to manage that as you go on.
Sam, what do you remember from that transition from 4 to 6, and what were the things that you were working on, whether it was the training of the team or building other leaders into the team? I'm aware that you've got a strong team. Tell me what your recollections are.
It's quite interesting over that period, Jesse. So we have 2 little girls. I was actually predominantly out of the practice clinically during that period. Before I fell pregnant with our first daughter, we did employ an amazing team member who we had pegged as being our practice manager long term, and she definitely took the reins with managing both our HR and just the day-to-day operations of the practice. So we were, very fortunate to have her amongst our team. She
very much gave us the freedom that, during Sam's pregnancy, she could take the foot off the pedal there a little bit without the machine slowing down. certainly gave me the opportunity to focus on clinical dentistry, mentoring new graduates, training, and I guess everyone just playing to their strengths. So very fortunate. So
what I want to ask you is about winding back your time, Adam, because I'm aware that you've wound back your clinical time. Again, like everyone else, wanting that work-life balance. And one of the traps that lots of dentists kind of get into is they kind of see time away from the chair as lost opportunity, lost revenue. Did you kind of gradually wind it back, or did you go cold turkey? And equally, what did you need to have in place so that you could do that with confidence and not feel like we're going to be pulled back in every 5 minutes?
That temptation to be pulled back in, it's very strong. If you're a doer, your solution was always to do more. So I think what you need to do is you do have to be at a point where you've got associates, you've got a strong hygiene team that the cash flow will still maintain it and afford you the ability to drop clinical hours. I think the big thing then is you need to look at, with the drop in your clinical hours, is that affording you time out of the business? So time to do things you enjoy and recharge, or equally, is it affording you time in the business? And I think for a lot of us, we probably all have jobs in our practice that really are strategic, high level thinking sort of jobs we need to do, tasks we need to do that will actually grow our business, but we probably are pretty bad at dedicating time to them. So I think it's, as you take the foot off, you do pick up other tasks, and you do need to keep yourself growing.
What were your observations, again, during the winding back of Adam's clinical hours? Because you would have seen the temptation to be pulled back in, and we all feel it. I've felt it. We're all human. What key insights do you have from that period of time as well, where you saw that the business growing, your associates are flourishing, your hygiene team's flourishing? What was the push, do you think, that gave Adam the confidence to do that?
It's quite interesting. I do remember our practice manager being very firm on the idea of, we are dropping a day and we are not putting it back in. We're going from 5 days to 4. You then went to 3 and 2 as the final move. I feel like 4 days was quite a nice balance. And then to get back to 3 days, I feel like you enjoyed that 1 day to be able to allocate to the business, but then another day to just be out of the practice. I feel like that 3 day a week was a really sweet point to be at. To be honest, I've seen the 2 days more, almost Adam's wanting more structure in those other 5 days in the week, and almost, what does he spend his time doing and where is his time most valuably spent? But it's interesting. I mean, when we first started, obviously, we were very key person dependent. Adam was producing 91% of production. I was a lovely 9% over here.
An important 9%, Sam. I'm just going to put that out there.
A very hardworking 9%.
But dropped back down to 81% in our second year. That was when we had our first associate join us. The biggest step was then in that third year, dropping back to 52%. Still, doing big hours, but, very much building the team around us to be able to provide that treatment to our patients, which was lovely.
So in the process of winding back time, again, you guys have done it very successfully down to 2 days these days, which is terrific. What do you think stops people from stepping back, apart from the lost opportunity problem? Is it a lack of systems and team structure? Is it the pull of being drawn back in? Combination of everything? I guess I'm just curious to ask you where some people might go wrong, what you've observed, maybe even some of your own things there.
I feel like at that point, it's almost easier to just work the extra day.
Yeah.
But we knew that long term, we wanted the ability to be able to go away for a couple of weeks at a time and to be able to have a team available to support our patients.
Yeah.
So it was very much having blinkers on to that idea rather than being drawn back in and saying, I'll do another day, because we quite enjoy clinical dentistry. It's not that we don't enjoy it. It's more that long-term goal.
And you've mentioned your practice manager and how instrumental she's been to helping you achieve the things you wanted to achieve. But as you've gone on this journey, obviously we've got to make sure we're not stretching her too thin and burning her out. How you've been able to resolve key person dependency on her, maybe transitioning to more of a leadership team rather than having a key one person. What have you learned in that process? And again, what skills have you needed to develop in the process of building that leadership team?
I think very, very much, like a clinician has two hands. Your key leaders in your practice, they've only got so many hours in a day. So a lot of what we identify is there's a lot of stuff ending up on our manager's plate that was fairly low level tasks. So it's very much about equally us stepping back and letting go and sometimes being told to get out of your own way. Also, we've had to say to our practice manager as well, because she's a very hard worker, but it's also identifying that, hey, this task can be done by another team member. So I think it's in identifying those team members, lifting them. You don't need to completely carbon copy that person's role in every task, but some of the key functions certainly you need to be able replicated in your practice. So if your staff manager's on leave for a fortnight, you need to know someone's going to do rostering and pays and whatnot, so the team will appreciate that. But yeah, it's looking at those next people in the wings and giving them something a bit more buy-in, a bit more responsibility. And sometimes those people are already in your team. Sometimes you do need to recruit externally for them.
Cool. So I think the next stage of that journey was really hitting capacity ceiling number 2. You had the 6 chairs, and as you said, not surprisingly, because you've got really strong patient flow, you've got the whole marketing thing down well. The 6 chairs filled up. But of course, by that stage, there's no more space. And you go, oops. So did it surprise you? I know you said that you grew quickly, but did it surprise you how quickly you grew into that space? Were you expecting a bit longer of having a slightly easier existence from a capacity point of view, or did it just kind of happen all out of the blue?
Yeah, I think we thought things would slow down a little bit. I think we thought the growth curve would peter off somewhat at some stage.
We had that thought because the practices we'd worked in the past were 3 to 4 chairs, and they'd been within the community for 20 odd years, had a very good patient base, had never grown beyond that 3 to 4 chairs. So when we first opened, we plumbed and wired for 4, thinking that if we were able to achieve that, that's amazing. Taking on the 2 additional, we were almost like, yeah, that's phenomenal. Like no other practice we've worked in before has been able to reach that point. Yeah, we definitely didn't expect to kind of continue beyond that.
What sort of things did you need to support that 6-chair practice so you didn't need it 2, 4 or anything in between? What did you need in terms of your documentations, the structures, the systems? In a small practice, you can kind of have corridor conversations. Hey, Mary or Susie or Bob or Peter, can you do X, Y, Z, please? I want to ask you how reliant you became on your systems and what role that's played in your growth as well.
Yeah, what you're describing is exactly right. At a smaller level, you can have a meaningful conversation quite quickly, whereas a bit bigger team, you need to deliver the message much more broadly while still being concise and clear, which sometimes if it's got the message has to roll down a chain, it can be Chinese whispers. The biggest thing I saw sort of break or capacity to hit is, and I guess this goes back to the original planning for the 4 chairs. Everything I discussed with the designer was about maximising revenue producing areas in the practice. Even in those original plans, we're looking at three surgeries in a consult room. We were talking to the 4th treatment room. I'm glad we were, because we definitely needed it. But going to the chairs 5 and 6, we certainly see that no longer is the reception area big enough. No longer is the admin area. So all those sorts of non-clinical areas that don't directly generate revenue really got cramped. And I think the one thing we really felt is that original feel that we had and what we were trying to offer patients coming in and for team members working, it did start to get impacted. I guess, we're not talking capacity in terms of numbers of what we can see, but we lost a bit of that feeling that we were chasing.
That's really important for you guys, because that feeling, that culture, that feeling, that experience, that community vibe has always been really central to you guys. That's really in your DNA. And as I said, you've obviously recaptured that, because we see it coming through loud and clear in all that you do. What allowed you to reconnect with that, Adam, to recapture that vibe?
I think very much we went back to basics and looked at what it was that made us successful and a really rapidly growing practice in those early days. And it was clear we needed to capture that feel back. We needed more space. And like I said, we were always on the hunt for something bigger after the first few years. And lo and behold, we were able to find it. Again, I'm a creature of habit. I didn't want to move too far from the existing site, and Sam would constantly come up with suggestions for, we could knock over these 2 houses, and the local council was quite myopic with their views on what could be converted to commercial and what not. Yeah, when we found that next site, to me, it was giving us the opportunity to expand, get that feeling back, to give those important areas of the practice, those non-clinical areas, those important admin tasks, following up, patient care, to give those areas the space that they needed to allow the practice to continue to grow and not impact on the feel for patients coming in, for team members coming in, take things back to, I guess, where it all started.
And that leads us into the new site, right? And so how many chairs in the new premise, or how many chairs can it take in the new premise?
We can fit 12 in. 12.
All right. So we've gone from 2 to 4 to 6 to 12, which is amazing, right? And so firstly, congratulations. That's a wonderful story of rapid growth. And I know you've been celebrated in the local media a lot up there. You found the site, you designed the site, you built the site in remarkably short period of time. And Sam, I know your fingerprints are on this a lot as well. So I want to ask you how you managed to do that. I know you were working pretty hard to get it all done, but what was it specifically that allowed you to compress that time frame?
I think for us, it was actually the preceding 4 or 5 years in looking for a site, finding the perfect space. So I had been talking with a designer for 3 years before we decided on the site that we eventually ended up in, more just to get a gauge as to what the process is, what is required. We had very strong views as to how we wanted it to look and feel from a patient perspective flowing through. So as quickly, we inspected our site in March. It settled end of May and handover was December. So that sounds like a very short space of time, but it was more the preceding years to get to that point. We were still, I would say January 2022, we were still on the fence as to whether we would leave our 6-chair leased premise and jump in and do it, to be quite honest with you. As much as we've been looking for years and as much as it was something that we wanted to do, it was still, I feel like we were tethered. It was a brilliant location, which I think clouded our judgment from time to time. And we'd come out of that cloud and we'd see the rainbow, and then all of a sudden we'd kind of go back into our shell. But January 2022, we definitely sat down and we made the bold and courageous decision to jump in at that point. So at that point, we were then very ready and very open for any opportunity that came up. And that's where our site came on the market on the Thursday. We viewed it on the Friday. Our offer had been accepted. Whereas I feel like, the years leading up to that point made us be bold, made us make that decision very, very quickly, and that it ticked all of the boxes. We obviously like the idea of having our own standalone site and not be at the mercy of a landlord going forward. Yeah, just very, very proud in having made it happen that quickly.
So Sam, I just want to go back to January 2022 for a moment when you were on the fence. What was that tipping point? What was it that gave you that courage, or what was the insight or the conversation that you had with Adam? What was it that you guys came across that got you off the fence?
We spoke at length about, we really like the idea of Adam being off the tools completely and having the time to mentor clinicians to a very high level. He's brilliant at it. He enjoys it. And he sees how fulfilling each clinician's role is with us. And that's really heartwarming. I've personally had friends go out and they graduate and they go and work at a practice with no mentor whatsoever. And it's almost like they're handcuffing themselves. And maybe they feel that they do have the clinical skills to be able to do well in that situation, but it's almost like they don't know what they don't know in that moment. And if they're seeing, you know, a tooth that needs to be removed and they don't have someone in the surgery beside them to be able to bail them out, you know, are they going to take out that tooth? Are they going to have to refer it elsewhere? So we like the idea of Adam going off the tools and being able to mentor our team.
I think as well, as you get bigger, I guess, you know, you expect some turnover. You know, it'd be amazing if, you know, you only attracted the best clinicians, the best team members, and they stay with you for the life of your business. We know that's, you know, not likely to happen for, you know, at all for everyone. But when you have a bigger practice, you know, or in our early days when we lost our first dentist and we had, you know, the 4 chairs running, that was 1/4 of our clinician base. So the idea of having a bigger pool of dentists meant that, you know, when you had a dentist on annual leave, it was less of a reduction in revenue. So I think it smooths out curves is probably one thing as you get bigger, when you got someone missing or sick or on annual leave.
I really love that, because again, you're just spreading the load across more people. So if one piece becomes away or sick, or you know, one piece of the puzzle, I mean, not one piece of the person, one person's away or sick or whatever, then ultimately the impact is minimised. I want to just come back to something you mentioned early in the conversation, because I know, you know, you guys track your numbers really well. You're really, you know, good at managing cash flow, looking at the revenue, looking where the expenses go. And A, I'll ask you about the importance of that. But B, I want to ask you as well. You said at the beginning that in the early days, Adam, you were doing 91% of the revenue, and Sam 9%, which is great because you guys were working together as that. But I'm curious to ask, now that you've got more people on board, just for an indication, what percentage of the revenue are you generating now, and the importance of tracking that over time? For
me, it's down to 23%. I know that because I calculated it today for a report I'm doing, but it's petered down over the years, so from 91 to 23. The other thing I've been able to do is obviously grow that revenue as a number, but also dropping clinical days at the same time, which is, you know, so yes, the practice relies less on me, but it's not because my personal contribution is any less, but it also reflects the team. I just want to ask, Adam, you said that you've been able to grow the revenue, grow the profitability, and wind back your time. On a personal note, what's that allowed you and Sam to think about and do differently than when you were hands in mouth 6 days a week, Elmo on Sundays? It gives you the freedom to stop and smell the roses as well. So a big thing for us, especially with our eldest starting school this year, is just being able to take some time out together and spend time as a couple. Because, you know, before we had children, before we had the practice, you know, it was just the two of us. So it's nice to sort of get a degree of that back, because the past, you know, 9 years, we've achieved a lot, and I think we need to acknowledge that. But also, you know, before all that, it was us. So, like I said, it's nice to enjoy the fruits of your labour and stop and reflect and, yeah, spend time out of the practice as well. Sam, what would you reflect on in that sense? Absolutely. Our Friday date day is such a highlight. And for anyone that's not allocating that time as a couple, I don't want it in my calendar, you know, we're doing this and we're doing that. But
to actually allocate that time together is beautiful. And I'm so grateful for that.
And just for the sake of the listeners, I'm just going to tell you that I allocated that time in my diary for my wife, and she didn't like the allocation either. So I've had to learn that husbandly lesson around that as well. But it's still allocated. I just don't tell her it's allocated. Guys, you've been really, really generous sharing your experiences. You guys are, as I said, a wonderful case study around scaling, and you've done it so well. I guess what I'd really just like to round out our conversation with is any last thoughts, reflections, hints, tips, things that have dawned upon you, things that you think are valuable for the audience to take away from this conversation?
I think you need a dose of realism. I don't think you can let sort of ambition cloud good judgment, but I think equally back yourself and just be ready for that next stage of growth and have an idea ahead of time what it looks like. What you'll need to get there. There's certain inflection points along the journey where that next step may require a considerable amount of expense, whether it's equipment or extra team members. So I think it's being ready to pull that pin when those times come.
Sam?
Yeah, I look towards the future, and I'm just so excited to provide our team with the very best workspace and mentorship. And I'm excited to see the enjoyment that their working career brings them, whether they're, clinicians or support staff. I feel like we're in a very privileged position to be able to do our utmost to truly provide for that work-life balance for our team, and for them to work there 4 days each week, treating the loveliest, most appreciative patients, but performing the dentistry that they love, to then be able to enjoy what our region has to offer for that additional 3 days. It feels pretty magical to me, to be honest. So I'm really excited for what the future years hold.
I'm really excited for you both as well. And as I said at the beginning and throughout the conversation, everything I see about Jacaranda Family Dental is this embodiment of values. And I see it in the way you speak about your practice, the way you speak about your team and your patients. I see it in your social media. I see it in the lovely comments from your patients online as well. And it's no surprise to me that you've done so incredibly well. I think you should both be enormously proud of what you've achieved. And I hope you take a moment to reflect on that too, because it is a wonderful achievement. And like you, Sam, I'm really excited about what the future holds for you as well, because the past few years have been pretty amazing for you. The next few years are going to be just as amazing. And again, I just want to take a moment to salute the good work that you've done and say thank you so much for being generous enough to share those lessons and experiences with us all today.
Thank you so much, Jesse. And it's genuinely it's such a team effort. Yeah, we are the leaders, but I'm just full of gratitude for our amazing leadership team and the work that they do, and it's such a positive light and so engaging, and I'm just very grateful for the team we have. So, but thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Adam.
Thanks, Jesse.
Thank you, Jesse.
Thank you for listening to the Savvy Dentist podcast. For more episodes, go to drjessiegreen.com/savvydentist. And to discover how to build a high-performance dental practice, visit drjessiegreen.com and download the free report.